Welcome to the Students of the Word podcast. My name is Odane Brissett, and today we have Zachariah Lockhart, Derric Franklin, and Spencer Gumpert with us. We'll be discussing the topic of modesty. What does it mean to be modest? How is it that we as Christians can live in a world that seeks to promote immodesty or has various views of modesty? Well, I'm going to get right into it. Zachariah, what are some of the world views regarding modesty?
Whenever culture is left up to its own devices, it
Right.
develops a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the views of modesty is, it's cultural. It varies on the culture you're in. You know, you have the tribes over here; they're really modest, or you have the Scots over here. You have the British. So in one way, it's cultural to the world. Another way, it's very temporal.
Right.
It shifts very rapidly. You know, one day it's the long maxi skirts and the overflowing dresses and 4 or 5 button suits, and then the next day you have the bikinis at the beach and the short shorts that we see nowadays.
Right.
You know, it's subjective in some ways to some people. It's ever changing.
Right. So some people view modesty as being something it changes, as Zachariah was saying, with the times. It changes with culture from place to place. As you were saying, you will see people wearing different things in different weathers, and they'll just say that, what's the adage that they like to say? When in Rome, do as the Romans. So if people are dressed in a particular way or they're behaving a certain way, they expect you to just follow them instead of seeking to be different. So in today's discussion, I want us to highlight 2 things regarding modesty. Should we as Christians be modest in terms of our attire? And also, how does our behavior translate to the modesty that we portray as well? What does it mean to be modest in regards to attire?
Well, modest in regards to attire. You don't. I think the common phrase is you don't want to show a lot of skin.
Right.
That's the common, perhaps the most tame way to put it. You don't want to show a lot of skin, but in the same degree, you can go too far.
That's right.
And be too immodest in the much.
So it goes both ways.
Yes.
You can have on too much clothes or you can have on too little clothes. But many times we focus simply on someone not having on enough clothes.
Yes. That's the most common.
In 1 Peter, let's look at it real quick. Well, 1 Peter 3:3, and if one of y'all will grab that, I'll look at 1 Timothy 2, verse 9. 1 Timothy 2:9, it says, "In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair, or golds, or pearls, or costly array." Some people think that wearing too much, or the Bible teaches at times that wearing too much is a form of immodesty. We said too little as well can be a form of immodesty. But at the heart of the matter is not necessarily the things that you wear, but it's primarily the intent with which you wear it. So it stems the question, or at least the question, does the Bible actually give us a guideline regarding our attire? Does the Bible state or specify or give us an example of what it is that God considers to be immodest? What do you think about that, Derric?
Well, when we think about the Bible examples, a lot of times people will go back to Adam and Eve.
Right.
Because that'll be the example they'll say is, well, when
First
Adam and Eve were
people.
in the garden, the first people
how
said they
God
were
made
not
them.
ashamed, they were naked.
Right.
And then when we see that when they knew that they were naked, God clothed them.
Right.
And so when we think about, fig leaves, and if you've ever gone through like a Bible class, there's always, just a few fig leaves covering certain places, and, what would be almost considered what a bikini would look like in today's society, and saying, well, that's what they were wearing whenever they made their clothes. But God came, and God, made the first sacrifice of killing an animal so that they could be clothed.
Right.
And then we can look at how God has said this for Adam and Eve, because that's something we need to point out too, that this entire conversation about modesty is not just about women's dress. Men can be immodest as well.
That's right.
So it's not just what a woman wears, because we think about, a bikini, or we think about, masky skirts or whatnot. But a male can be immodest in his dress as well, not just a female in that. And because Adam and Eve both were clothed by God, not just Eve
alone.
to be clothed alone.
I once heard someone saying that the chest area or the torso of men is not a sexual area. In general, they were trying to say that you don't have to cover your chest if you're a male. But yet and still, as you were saying, when God was making clothes for men and women, he covered not only their lower part, their lower region, but he also covered their torso. In Genesis 3:7, it says, "And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons." Exactly what you were saying, Derric. Initially, when God created them, they were naked, but because there was no sin, because their thoughts were pure, there was nothing for them to worry about. They were unashamed. But after they ate of the fruit, there was recognition that they were naked, and that's when God made clothes for them. So some of the lessons that we can learn from this scenario given in the Bible regarding Adam and Eve is that a man and a woman can be somewhat covered and still be considered naked by the biblical standards. If they don't cover exactly what God had covered when Adam and Eve were considered themselves to be naked, then one is considered by God to be naked. And two, they felt guilty for being immodestly attired. We said it already that in today's society, people do not feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
They do not feel guilty for being immodestly dressed. As a matter of fact, we said before as well that it comes down to the intents of people. Sometimes they want to do it because they want people to look at them. They want to get that attraction or that appreciative stare, those cat calls, those cat whistles that they can get from the public.
Yeah, they want to feel noticed. They want to be somebody, and sadly, that's led a lot of our culture and a lot of our
youths, a lot of people,
a lot of people, not just our people, but everyone,
right,
down the wrong path, and that's led to all sorts of other things.
In Genesis 3:21, Derric highlighted that modesty is not determined simply by gender. It's a universal thing. Men can be immodestly dressed. Women can be immodestly dressed. But as people, God created us and he wants us to be moderately dressed. When God made clothes for men and women, he fitted them, as Derric was saying, with the coat of skins of animals. The first sacrifice of an animal was made. So God was the personal designer, the personal clothing designer for the covering of mankind. And as I was saying, he made clothes for not only the lower sections, as some people would have it, but also the upper sections. So Zachariah, what role do you think modesty plays in avoiding temptation and promoting purity? Why is it that God would cover man to such a degree?
Well, it helps in restraining our own thoughts and our own actions. You look at men are very visual creatures, and
women too.
Yep, that's true.
Like how you defended that.
All right.
But it helps men especially control themselves.
Right.
You know, we often act on things we see. We act on things that pop into our head because we had some form of visual stimuli.
Right.
God was kind of creating a barrier, if you will, because there are certain things reserved only for marriage. You know, there are aspects of the body that a husband only gets to see of his wife.
Right.
And vice versa. So in a way, it helps us keep us responsible. It helps us keep restrained. And a lot of people hear restrain and they think, oh, well, that's terrible. You know, that's horrible. I should have freedom. You are given freedom in a specific scenario, marriage.
Right.
So it helps us portray godliness as well and helps us maintain a pure focus. You know, if you were having people wear whatever they want or not wear anything, you know, worship, work, everything would be disastrous.
Right. But you also have the scenario where people seek to justify themselves, where they say they can wear what they want, they have that freedom to wear what they want. And if an individual or someone else has an indecent thought because of what they're wearing, then that's not on them. That's on that individual because their mind is not right. But the Bible teaches us that we
ways.
also have we have that ability or that influence to affect others and their decisions.
Yep.
You might not be the one that's telling them to go sin, but your decisions or the choices you make can influence what they do as well. So as Christians, we have a further obligation not only to ourselves, but also to others. So concerning modesty, one of the things that we must note that we're going to talk about real quick, we must note that God has a standard for modesty. We talked about Adam and Eve. He covered their entire bodies. We must also know and understand the consequences of immodesty. Being immodest is a sin. It's a sin in the eyes of God. And we must also accept our responsibility as Christians and take a stand for modesty. We don't like confrontation as a people, because confrontation means that you're not going to be getting along with someone. And we try as much as possible to get along with people. The Bible will tell you that as much as it lies with you, live peaceably with all men. But that does not mean that if they're trying to impose or present a sinful lifestyle to you, that you're going to be okay with it, that you're not going to speak out.
It's almost like that soft answer turns away wrath. That they take that verse to some degree, and they think that soft answer is like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not good. No, you really shouldn't be doing. That's not the soft answer that the Bible is talking about. A soft answer is one out of love. That's right. And kindness, not niceness.
Right.
People will often weaponize the term nice and be like, well, that's not very nice of you. Well, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be nice. I was trying to save your soul. I was trying to be kind.
That's ultimately nice as well, because you have that visionary perspective. You're looking at the long run of things, but they're very short-sighted in how they see things.
Yeah, and you were talking about that justification that people make. Oh, it's not me. That's them. That's on them for being tempted by me.
Right.
Like, God gave me this body. God blessed me with this. Whatever. That's me. I want to show off God's body that God blessed me with, or whatever excuse people use, and then they blame others for being tempted by their foolishness.
Right.
Well, but when we talk about modesty, I mean, a lot of times we bring up, less clothing. A lot of times, that's kind of what brings up. But in today's society, when we think about like gold and silver, we may not have those things to look that way. But how many shirts have something printed on it that should not be printed on it?
That's
or something
true.
That if
Graphics.
you wore something that was offensive to someone else, and you like, well, it's not offensive to me. I'm just supporting this cause, or I'm supporting this group or whatever. That can be immodest as well, because you are presenting something that one can shed a bad light on certain things, but also can be offensive to someone in a negative way that can cause someone to stumble.
Right.
And us as Christians, we think about like attire going to church. Like if you showed up to church with, different slogans on your shirts or different T-shirts, well, that can distract almost as much as someone who is, less clothing.
True.
So for our modesty, it goes back to that, attire or apparel that we could have on, and it could be just what you're presenting with that, not so much just as much skin as you show.
Right. And that's a good segue to lead right into our next point, which is modesty in behavior. Because the clothes that you wear is also an action, and that also affects the people who are around us. So we just saw that modesty, it doesn't only reflect or doesn't talk about simply our attire in terms of how much or how little clothes or clothing we have on, but it also relates to our behavior. The Bible reminds us that we must be modest in one area or in multiple areas, but the first one being we should be modest in our speech. Our speech should be wholesome. What does wholesome speech entail?
Well, someone once said that, if you're using, as we used to say, potty language, or foul language or whatnot, well, fresh water and sewer water can't come out of the same pipe.
Right.
So when we think about our behavior and how we speak, well, if it's, with honey and it sounds good, well, if you're spewing all these nonsense and all these evil things, then it's a septic tank. You can't say, well, I'm going to be clean speaking whenever you're, constantly doing those things, and people start expecting that of you. If someone has a reputation for, a potty mouth, as we would say, or using their words in certain ways that they need to be, well, people may not trust them, or they may say, well, I'm not going to listen to that person, and they just shut them down because they're like, it's not worth listening to.
I really liked what the example that you gave of clean water, dirty water. Clean water cannot mix with dirty water and still be clean water at the end of the day. It's going to be dirty water. So our speech must be wholesome, but our speech must also be free from gossip. Why should we not gossip?
Well, a little word spoken here and there can cause a lot of dissension.
That's right.
Even a small word spoken in quiet, if it's in a private setting, spoken between two individuals, and that's not gossip, that's one thing. But if you're intentionally like, hey, I heard this thing about brother so-and-so. I heard this thing about Odane.
Wow, that's quick gossip. You did
It
not
is
wait.
quick gossip. And
not wait.
and God really frowns upon that. And Paul in First Thessalonians 4:11, he tells some people that were dealing with that at that time. He says, just stop, be quiet, mind your own business,
Find work to do with your hands.
Yes,
That's right. So gossip not only can lead to, as you were saying, damaging the relationships that we have, but it can also hinder or prevent us from forming relationships with other people. So we need to be modest in our speech, but also in our actions. We must avoid overindulgence, and we also must avoid being in excess of things. Too much of anything, they would say, is not a good thing.
Would you be fun?
Too much of anything is going to lead to someone being sick. You ever, when you were small, you ever wanted to have as much candy as possible, probably on Halloween or one of those days when you'd go trick or treating? When you were in trick or treating, I'll find someone who'll agree
hurt my
with me.
teeth.
And when
This
you
is
would
probably
go,
why.
what would your parents do? They wouldn't give. They would tell you not to have all of it at one time because you're going to get sick. If we are overindulging, it's also going to lead. It's not a form or type of modesty.
Well, and Zachariah had brought up that marriage is a great thing, and certain things are sacred in marriage. But said if you are indulging in those things out in public, or even if it is more
Would be
to
modest.
making people immodest, because it's like, well, it's not wrong to love your wife. It's not wrong to show affection towards your wife. But there can be overabundance of it that can be immodest, or you can do things that the world may say, well, that's perfectly fine to be doing in public, but we know that that can cause people to stumble or hinder people saying, well, I don't want to be around them, or they can say other things towards that as well.
That's right.
Or overall, you can just cause a brother to stumble. Even though it's a relationship which is natural between a husband and wife. If someone else outside of the relationship
Gets involved,
they can still be tempted by really, to some degree, anything.
and that's what even highlights what Zachariah was saying more, that there are things that in marriage need to remain private. There are things that you don't do in public because it might lead other people to stumble or fall. And finally, we must be modest in our attitude. The Bible will tell us that we need to be careful not to think of ourselves more than we ought. One of the common ways in which people stumble or fall into immodesty is that they portray a prideful nature. The Bible will tell us that pride goes before a fall, haughty spirit before destruction. We've seen it with Samson. We've seen it with numerous people in the Bible,
And
where
nations.
their pride, and nations as well, where their pride, like Edom, would lead to their downfall. How is it that we can rein in that pride so that we are modest in the sight of God?
Being humble.
Being humble.
That's the simple.
This guy has all the answers.
It's the simple answer to it. Without humility, pride, arrogance, it all grows unhindered.
Right.
People say oftentimes, well, I don't want to be humble. That's a sign of weakness. The strongest people we have in our society, the men that we look up to, were men who had strength under control, men who knew what to say, when to say. That wasn't to say they didn't raise their voice. It wasn't to say they didn't throw a blow every now and then. They knew when to.
Right.
And that's what the Christian is supposed to do. That's what the individual who's aiming to not be prideful is meant to do, because you have to show modesty in your temperament. You have to be self-controlled. Same thing reigns true with our attitudes. It reigns true with our dress. It reigns true with our consumption of things. Without modesty, you become addicted to different substances. You become addicted to different people, to different ideologies, to different mindsets.
And that can lead to a wasted life.
Yep,
for sure.
Right.
Or a very short one.
A waste.
True. True.
A waste of time is a waste of life. I think it's something like that adage.
We'll work with it.
Yeah. Thank you. But that's a very true principle that the Bible teaches throughout the book of Psalms,
right?
Or Proverbs. Excuse me.
Proverbs.
Both.
Yes,
depending on the psalm.
All right. So as we wrap up right now.
Oh, sorry.
How can we apply? I want one example or one way from each of you guys how it is that we can apply biblical modesty to our daily lives instead of just saying that people need to be modest. How is it, or how would you strive to encourage them to live modestly? How can they show it in their daily lives?
Live it.
All right, live it.
You got to restructure your entire life. Be modest in your attire. Be modest in your speech. Be modest in the things that you consume, the way that you handle your body, the way that you interact with others. You know, it all hinges on modesty. So just by practicing it, you're able to teach others.
So live what you preach. It's in there.
Now, I think one of the biggest things, you have to know the standard.
Right.
You know, because it said you can't really live something unless you know the standard. And so when we look at what God says, this is the standard. God's word is the standard for what we are. Modesty is judged by, not by cultural norms, not by what people may think, not the pride of saying, well, it's my body, I can do what I want. It's saying if God's word says this is how you live your life,
That's how you live it.
you have to live it that way.
All right, nice.
And regarding with the modesty of behavior and actions and intentions, I think a good verse to point to would be Psalm 90, verse 12. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. You know, man is few in days, and if peradventure he lives to 80 years, well, what will it do him if he's not wise? If he doesn't show the proper source and honor to that source, God.
That's right.
I think the last thing I would say would be also teach your children.
That's right.
One of the things in our society right now is people aren't teaching their kids.
They're allowing their tablets, iPads, and other people to teach their children what they should be teaching them themselves.
And to go on that tangent, really, that's what we see.
Last tangent.
That's what we see in the previous generations. And that's what we see the children of today, because that starts in a previous generation, and it slowly creeps along until we get to a weak generation, if you will.
That's right. That's all that we have time for today. Thank you for joining us on the Students of the Word podcast.
One more tangent.
And we hope that you have a great day. Thank you.
Amen.